Hello viewers, welcome to this program. During this program, we shall be discussing the topic Instructional Design. I am Sutapa Bose. I teach at the School of Education, Indira Gandhi National Open University. I welcome you once again to this program, and during this program, we are going to discuss the concept of instructional design. What is instructional design? Why we need an instructional design? What are the benefits of teaching on the basis of instructional design? The things that we would be discussing during this program that I am going to present in the form of an overview of the content. First of all, the term instructional design, what it means, and after that, since there are two words in the term instructional design, we shall take an analytic view of this term and begin with a discussion on the concept of instructions. After that, the second part of the term instructional design will be taken up, and our discussion would focus on the idea of designing, the concept of designing, what designing means. After that, we shall differentiate between two terms, instructions and teaching. And on the basis of these discussions, we shall synthesize and arrive at the term instructional design taken as a whole. First of all, I would like to ask you, do you plan before carrying out an activity? Let me give some examples. For example, you want to go to a tourist spot. You have tourism in your mind. Let us take one more example. Someone is unwell and he needs to visit the doctor. One more example. I need to go for shopping. I need to buy certain things. And then there is a course in which I would like to enroll because I aspire for higher education and I want a job. These are just examples. Many more such examples could be there. What do we do when we aspire for these things? I aspire to visit a place. I aspire to get consultation from a doctor. I aspire to buy certain things. I aspire for a course. I aspire for a job. What I do is that I plan. How do I plan? If I have to go for tourism somewhere, it's not that I pick up my suitcase, buy tickets and start on a journey. It's not like that. There is a lot of planning that goes into tourism. Even if I have to go to a doctor, I need to plan my visit. When would the doctor be available? What would I tell the doctor? What are my problems? Which sort of doctor would I approach? If I am planning for shopping, what are the things that I would need to buy? Why am I buying? From where will I buy? I will have to plan each and every aspect of shopping. Similarly, if I am an aspirant for higher education, which course would be relevant to my needs? Which course would be in sync with my prior learning? I would have to plan the course in which I wish to take admission on the basis of these aspects. What sort of job do I seek? How am I preparing for that job? All these things need planning. Now coming to the question, why is it so important to plan? Well, planning keeps an activity on track. For example, if I have planned to shop, if I have planned to go to a market in order to buy certain things for shopping, I would stay on the track and go to the market. It's very likely that I would not go to visit a doctor or start planning for a job. Therefore, planning keeps an activity on track. If I am planning for tourism to a place, I would not be thinking about anything else but only the things that would make my visit a tourist spot smooth and successful. Therefore, it is important to plan so that the activity that we carry out on the basis of the plan remains on track. It doesn't get derailed. Moreover, planning enhances the likelihood of the purpose, the goals being fulfilled. For example, if I am planning to go to a doctor, if I have planned my visit well, the likelihood of my being able to meet the doctor, get consultation would be enhanced. If I am planning for a course in which I would like to enroll, if I have planned it well, it's likely that I wouldn't miss the admission session. I would enroll and my registration would be for the purpose for which I aspire for higher education. I would not end up enrolling in a wrong course. Therefore, we may say that planning enhances the likelihood of its purpose, that's goals being fulfilled. Now coming to some examples of teaching. When I plan what to teach, I also plan why I am going to teach, how it would serve the needs of my learners, what I am going to teach, why I should teach it, how I would teach it, this is a very important question, and when do I teach it. For example, I have to teach 12 topics. Which topic should I teach when? What would be the sequencing of the topics that I intend to teach? And then learning. For example, what should my students learn? Why do they need to learn it? How would they learn? And when should I teach them so that learning is effective? Therefore, we see that when I plan teaching, I take into consideration the corresponding questions pertaining to learning. Therefore, we say that planning is designing. As I said that the term instructional designing, we shall take an analytic view, and there are two words comprising it, instructions and designing, and we have started with the second word first. We are focusing on designing. Therefore, we say that planning is designing. Why do we say so? That is because designing is carried out for attaining the goals of an activity. We design, for example, a building so that it serves as a hospital. We don't carry out activities that would turn the hospital into a building that serves some other purpose like a school. If we are designing an airport, it would not be designed like a railway station. Therefore, we have to keep in mind the goals for which we are going to carry out the activity, and we design accordingly. Planning is therefore designing. How do we plan? Planning includes elements that will ensure the attainment of goals. I have said that designing is for attaining goals. Therefore, planning has to be carried out in such a way that we can include certain elements deliberately with full consideration. We include certain elements that would help us to attain the goals of the activity. For example, if I am planning teaching, I would incorporate in my plan the elements that would answer the questions like what am I going to teach, why am I going to teach that particular topic, how would I teach it, and when to teach. Therefore, we see that planning, which is the same as designing, is developed by including certain elements, and a lot of thought process goes into the selection and inclusion of these elements. The thought processes, and therefore the plan definitely intend to attain the goals of the activities being carried out. We have been using examples involving teaching, and as you know that the first word of the term instructional design is instruction. Now my question is, are teaching and instruction synonymous? Do these two words have the same meaning? Well, for a layman it could be synonymous. We who have backgrounds in education, we too sometimes use it in an interchangeable way, but we need to remember that there is a difference between instruction and teaching. What is the difference? Instruction is a goal-directed teaching process, and this process is pre-planned to a great extent. I would not say that when we teach, we rigidly stick to the plan that has been developed prior to teaching. A plan is not followed in a rigid way. A teacher definitely makes a plan, but the planning is done in a flexible way so that she can bring about the changes that are required while teaching. Nevertheless, it is essential to have a plan. It is essential to go to a classroom or to take an online teaching class only after planning well. And you see, we learn many things at home from our family members. For example, how to cook a dish or how to change a flat tire. And there are many more such examples. We learn how to download an app from our peers, from our friends. We learn how to stitch from members of our family. In this case, the teacher doesn't come planned. She doesn't have a plan in place before she teaches us. Therefore, teaching may be informal, unplanned. Whereas, when we go to a class room to teach or we take an online session, we don't start teaching without a plan. And this is how we differentiate between teaching and instructions. Instructions are planned, unlike teaching. Teaching could be planned, but in that case, it becomes instructions. Well, instructions therefore have goals, and instructional processes are systematic. What does it mean being systematic? When what to teach is in a definite and logical sequence. I'll share one example. For example, instructional designing. I have started with the concept of instructional designing, that what is it? And then having taught this, I would be teaching the genesis of instructional designing and then the benefits of instructional designing, approaches of learning vis-a-vis instructional designing. So this answers the question of being systematic in approach, being systematic while planning. And we also try to draw attention of the learners. How do we do it? We may begin our teaching with a question. What is instructional designing? How is it different from teaching? Are teaching and instructional designing synonymous? This is how we tend to make the learners curious about what we intend to teach. We also help them to recall what they have learned earlier. For example, while teaching the concept of instructional designing, we bring into the discussion the word planning. That is because whether or not one has studied education, planning is carried out by all of us. Therefore, when the learner begins to learn and she recalls the idea of planning in order to learn a new topic like instructional designing, it becomes easier to learn. Therefore, our teaching is again planned. That is because we have sequenced the ideas that we would be teaching, and we also try to draw attention, and how we are going to do that, that's also planned. And we have also planned how we would help the learner recall what she already knows, with what she is already familiar, and then how to explain the concept. What are the examples that I would be using? What are the metaphors that I would be using? For example, if I am going to teach the concept, the functioning of heart, I would use an example of a water pump. A water pump pumps water and heart pumps blood. Therefore, what are the examples? What would be the metaphors? And what would be my teaching aids? All these things I need to plan. And then teaching is not enough. Until and unless my learners have learned what is the point in teaching. Therefore, I should be in a position to assess. And then I should know that whether my teaching has been fruitful, whether it has been effective. And finally, I would summarize the things that I have taught so that my learners can recapitulate. You see that there are so many things that need to be planned, right from the goals, that why I am going to teach this topic, what would be the benefits to my learners. And then I plan the sequence of events. I plan how to draw their attention. I help them to recall, and that is also planned. I plan how I am going to explain a concept. I plan the examples. I plan the assessment strategies, that maybe while teaching I would raise questions. Maybe my learners would have to take some test. And finally, I help them to recapitulate. All these things help us to plan teaching. Now let us go back to the example of learning to cook from our family members, or learning to stitch. Of course, our family members didn't plan all these things. That was quite informal. That was quite unplanned, unlike instructions, which is planned teaching. Hence, answer to the question that whether teaching and instructions are synonymous, I would say instructions are also meant for teaching, but it makes teaching a planned activity. I would like to use certain examples for clarifying the concept of instructional designing, and also for clarifying the difference between teaching and instructions. Self-learning material is used by distance teachers so that they can teach at a distance. Print is the most common medium which is used for delivering instructions in the form of self-learning material. Supposing I want to teach how to develop self-learning material. It is a casual approach. What I would do is that I would just share a few self-learning material units and give a few tips for writing self-learning material. On the other hand, I want to impart instructions regarding the development of self-learning material. What I do is that in the first place, I set the goals. What are the goals? The goals are that I need to develop competencies for developing self-learning materials. My learners should be equipped with the competencies for developing self-learning material after I have imparted the instructions. What do? I plan the inputs. What am I going to teach? What would be the learning experiences? And again, coming back to the sequencing, in which order am I going to teach them? And then I plan the assessment mechanism. How am I going to assess whether they have actually learned to develop self-learning material? So I plan and then I go ahead and I check whether my plan has been successful through assessment. Let us take another example. For example, I want to learn a language, say French. There are 4 skills of communication. What are these? Listening, speaking, reading and writing. Therefore, I plan with the objective of developing the 4 skills of communication for a language. This is my objective. And then I need to plan the learning experiences that would help me to fulfill these objectives. I have to provide learning experiences pertaining to listening. This would help my learners to improve their pronunciation and comprehension of a language when it is spoken. And I would also plan learning experiences so that my learners can speak, can communicate orally. And I may begin with teaching simple sentences, beginning with say how to greet, how to be courteous, like saying thanks, excuse me, sorry, and so on. I begin with simpler experiences, simpler learning experiences, and then proceed towards more complex ones. And I also want my learners to read. So what are the learning experiences that I intend to include? I want my learners to write the language. Again, what would be the learning experiences? Maybe I would design some exercises, I would design some activities that my learners would carry out in order to develop the skills for communication through writing. So these are some of the examples that clarify the term instructions. That is how we plan each and every aspect of teaching, right from setting goals till recapitulation. These are the various elements that we plan. And coming back to the example of teaching a language, learning experiences need to be planned. And we should begin with simpler ones, simpler learning experiences, and sequence the learning experiences from simpler to more complex ones. As I said, how to greet, how to be courteous, how to tell your name, your address, your profession, and then describing weather. These are very simple learning experiences. And the vocabulary keeps on building. We may begin with commonly used words like food, clothes, and proceed towards more complex sentence formation, and this is how vocabulary increases. Therefore, we see that instructional designing is a process whereby we teach with certain goals. Instructions are imparted with goals of teaching. There is a certain target group, or we may say an audience, and we also teach as per their learning needs. We need to assess therefore that what are their learning needs. What do they need to learn? Whether they need to learn a language, whether they need to learn music or painting. If it is music, what is it that I am going to teach them? And then instructions are provided in a planned way. Learning experiences are also planned. Instructions therefore are designed for attaining instructional goals, and this is the reason why we carry out assessment while teaching in order to determine whether the teaching has been effective, whether our learners have been learning what we have been teaching, and we plan at the outset, I had said, and at the end also, towards the end also, I would say that we plan what to teach after deciding why am I teaching this, and then after having decided what to teach, we decide how to teach, and this would help us. For example, if I am planning a tourism activity, I need to visit a country, my plan would begin with learning about the country that I intend to visit and knowing about the weather so that I can plan my clothes. I can plan where to go, what to see. But when these things are shared informally, that remains just teaching and not instructions. This is the difference between planning for instructions and teaching in an unplanned way, and this is how instructional designing helps the process of teaching. Thank you.